I'm very, very firm in our commitment that Africa needs to industrialize. Fossil fuel industry has been demonized so much because people think about big fat capital, who is in charge, who owns that. There is an unfair agenda of ensuring that Africa stays poor. We have 600 million Africans that don't have access to electricity. They get up every day in the dark, they go to bed in the dark. If we go this green energy thing, a lot of us, our countries are going to be failed states. We're going to see a lot of more crises.
Green energy is everywhere on the news, in conferences and in government promises. It is sold as the future, the solution, the moral imperative. But here's the reality for Africa. The energy transition often comes at the expense of ordinary people, the ones who need electricity to run their houses, hospitals to save lives, and factories to create jobs.
In the Crossfire with Pieter Kriel, questioning power unequivocally and unapologetically.
While the West lectures Africa on going green, it's the same West that builds its wealth on oil and gas, that still consumes more than its share of energy, and that now tells us to leapfrog straight to renewables. The question isn't about technology or emissions. It's about justice, power, and who really gets to decide the future of energy. In this episode, we're digging into the African energy debate. We'll talk about promises, the contradictions, and the human cost of energy poverty. And let us ask the hard question: is green energy really for Africa? Or is it just the old extraction with a new name? My name is Pieter Kriel. I'm a South African political commentator, writer, and social critic. This podcast aims to expose power where it hides, unapologetically and unequivocally. So if you came here for polite commentary, you are in the wrong room. Our guest today is Mr. NJ Ayuk, the executive chairman of the African Energy Chamber. His message is simple, yet quite controversial. Africa must use its oil and gas to industrialize the continent before prematurely transitioning over to green energy. Without any further ado, let me introduce the guest right to you, who will introduce himself and tell you a bit more about himself, where you grew up, what your story is about, and why you've become so vocal about African energy sovereignty and for Africa to use its industrial powers to build up the continent.
Oh, thank you, Pieter. And really thank you for having me here. I think, I was born in Cameroon and grew up there, then later on moved to Germany and the United States and moved back to Africa. And I'm a lawyer by profession, and I still pride myself being a country lawyer with everything I do. But what is most important is that I'm very, very firm in our commitment that Africa needs to industrialize, because when we industrialize, then we give people a fighting chance to have good education, good opportunities, and build families right here in Africa. And energy is part of that. And you would say, why would a human rights lawyer become a fossil fuel advocate and a critic of an unjust green transition that doesn't really take into consideration African concerns? And we have to look at and really explore these issues in a very, very deep way. And that's why I really like having these discussions, but also being firm in finding solutions that puts Africa first.
Before we get into the pros and the negatives of fossil fuels or green energy or whatever it might be, I'd like to go into the fact that you have been a champion of African energy sovereignty. But some critics do label you as being a bit too close to fossil fuel. How do you reply to that?
We are all very close to fossil fuels. It's part of our life. If you look at this bottle, it comes out of fossil fuels. I think being the fossil fuel industry has been demonized so much because people think about big fat capital, who is in charge, who owns that. Let's stop and think for a minute. Let's talk about coal in South Africa. You know what? I'm very close to the coal miners. You know these coal miners, you know what they do? They get in there, they dig. They provide electricity, and people don't speak for them. The oil workers that are on rigs and roughnecks, and these people get up and go out there and work 10, sometimes 12 hours a day. It's everyday people. So nobody questions when you are a union advocate, advocating for people. That's wrong. Just because the position I take, it might seem similar to the CEOs of oil and natural gas companies or fossil fuel companies, say, you're very close. When I'm standing close to them, we close. But you know what's very important? I used to be a critic of the fossil fuel industry, and I still do. But I think what we have to realize is that we have to really stand with what is better for Africa, because if we drive up these companies because we want to be resource nationalists, we're very nationalist. We don't want it's us versus them, and these are big white people from Europe and from America. Let's drive them away. It doesn't work like that. We need to be able to work with everybody and everything. Nobody accuses Greta for being close to the green energy movement, even though she's wealthy and rich. Just the fact that I'm close to an industry that serves Africa, I'm close. And I'm proud of it. I'm very proud of my association with the fossil fuel industry. I'm proud of my association with the green industry when they come talk to me. I mean, they talk to me at night, but they don't want to talk to me during the day. So I just don't want to be a side chick. At least the fossil fuel guys hang out with me during the day as well.
When you speak about it objectively, because I don't think either one of us would argue that green energy is the future. It has to be the future for a sustainable, just environment. But getting to that position currently requires the dispossession, the damaging of the environment for many ordinary African people. Yes, the green transition in Africa. A lot of African people do get employed to work, like you've said, in mines, where they work many hours a day for little pay. And actually, they are the ones creating the electricity. But the calls, the contracts are being signed not in Africa and not on the terms and the just, fair equality of ordinary workers. It's being done in Paris or London or Washington. And I think that is where it comes in. You are not a critic of green energy. You are a critic of green energy being implemented in a wrong way, like imperialism was implemented to put African people down for the interest of Europe. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that. To an extent, it's what I call colonization, this time gone green. That's just what it is. It's a new colonization that you're having, but this time coming in the face, it's coming in the face of something you call green, and we're supposed to jump on it. I mean, let me give you an example. You had $450 billion in green bonds, right? You know how much came to Africa? Less than 3%. So where's the money? So we've been going to COP. And you go into COP and they say, we have they pledge $100 billion for Africa and poor countries all across the world. It never came. So when you make all these pledges and promises and you want to sign your green transition, your green contracts, and those pledges never came, what are we left with? We're left with saying that, leave us alone. Let us make our own choices. And if green means that we have to ship out all African raw materials into the wealthy countries for them to process and then bring it right back to us, and then we are paying 10, sometimes 50 times what the value is, then it doesn't really make sense. So if you're really interested in a just transition, How about that just transition start with us saying that let us build all the value chain in Africa. And so we can mine, process, develop industries here, and we can also sell some stuff to the world. We can sell some not just raw materials, but finished products instead of us shipping out minerals and then getting back the products, and we don't really have that. We have to give dignity to Africa and its resources. And I think what I do stand for, I'm not a nationalist. I don't believe in nationalism. I think resource nationalism is bad. I think we need to keep it open, but we also need to show respect and dignity to the communities, to the countries, and to Africans so that we can build healthy, better families right here in Africa rather than have our young people have to cross the Mediterranean to go find jobs in Europe. Some of them die on the Mediterranean, or have some of our young people to go to Dubai or other places to look for jobs. We want them to build better families here in Africa, and I think that's my biggest focus because I've seen so much young people suffering. We think we need to give them a fighting chance for a better life in this continent.
Absolutely. I think if the stats are not mistaking me, I think 70% of Africa's population is made up of the youth, who the majority of are jobless without a bright future because of the mistakes of the past, colonialism, extraction, imperialism, and so forth. I want to bring the conversation now to the fact that the green agenda, whether good or bad, has been pushed down the throats of global south countries. And why is it that green energy has to be forced down the throats of Africans and in global south countries, but not in global north countries, who are the majority contributors to CO2 emissions? I think Africa's population, let's say, accounts for 20% of the world, but they only make up around 4% of total greenhouse gas
Less
emissions.
than that,
Even less than that. Why is this agenda being pushed down the throats of the global south much harder than countries that actually need this kind of preaching?
Well, we've been told climate change, and that climate change is the reason for it, and global warming, as they used to call it, and we need to fix the global warming issue. It's called global warming, not Africa warming. Africa shouldn't have to carry the burden of this energy transition. If you want to have a transition, then it has to be just. But I think that there is an unfair agenda of ensuring that Africa stays poor. Africa doesn't have the energy it needs to compete in the future. You're seeing a continent that by 2050 would be 2.5 billion people. When you have 2.5 billion people, you are a huge market. So if you are a big consumer, you're just going to consume forever. But if you are a big producer, you are not going to be buying products, and you are going to be a real powerhouse and a superpower. And I think that's the big fear from a lot of the wealthy nations when it comes to Africa. So they'll tell you need to leapfrog, they'll tell the banks. And you talk about fossil fuels. The biggest consumers of fossil fuels are the wealthy nations. When the crisis in Ukraine started with Russia, they went all over Africa and even here in South Africa and saying, we need to buy all your coal, we need to buy all your natural gas. They didn't turn to solar and wind and said, they can print all the money. They could have put $500 billion to buy every wind turbine and every solar panel. It doesn't work because it doesn't have baseload. Do you know that natural gas today has been changed and is considered as green energy in the global north, in Europe? So when they do that, you know what? They can finance it. Yeah. But it's not green energy when it comes to Africa. So we stay poor. It's dirty energy. But when you talk about that, we have 600 million Africans that don't have access to electricity. They get up every day in the dark. They go to bed in the dark.
But they work and produce that electricity for the global north.
They do, but they don't have that. You got 900 million that don't have access to clean cooking technologies. Most of them women. That should be a human rights issue of our generation. But then you have 1 million Africans that die every year due to indoor pollution. But also, you have to also look at it. there is $2.5 trillion climate value that we get lost. So guess what? Women productivity, $800 billion lost because they have to go, they have to trek to the bushes to cut wood, to biomass to feed their family. There's a lot of loss that we have in here. And then you turn around and you tell us that we can't use the resources we have to improve the life of our people, but we need to produce the energy and send it to you because the have-nots should stay poor and the haves to continue going up. I think there's something fundamentally unfair about that, and I don't agree.
Yeah. You argue that Africa must use its oil and gas to industrialize the continent. But how do you justify Africa doing this against urgent climate science that says we all should actually be going green? And I understand the imperative that much of the global north, they still use much of the fossil fuels, and green energy is actually only secondary to that fossil fuels. So how do you envision Africa doing that while maintaining good relationships with the global north?
Sometimes you don't have to worry about relationships because we're going to have to do a lot ourselves. They should stop producing. We should start because our greenhouse gas emissions are nothing. They need to decarbonize. We need to industrialize. And we have a moral justification for that. But that's also why we need to step up our game, because the only reason why we're asking permission from them is because we have to always not run honest, transparent, free government. So we have to always run to them to beg for money. But, Peter, you and I are sitting right here. We're going to have to do something, fix this continent because, I watch movies when I have a chance, when I'm flying, but Superman is not coming. Batman is not coming. Wakanda Forever is a good movie, but the Black Panther is not coming. We're going to have to do a lot of this stuff ourselves. So we need to stop asking for permission to grow because China doesn't ask for permission to produce and manufacture and sell. Why should Africa have to ask for permission? So that African sovereignty, that belief that there is markets, we can use our financial resources, which we have them, but we need to break down the barriers that prevent our young people, our African entrepreneurs, from becoming the true drivers of the future. And we should not listen to them. We should need to be unapologetic. Our problem is that we apologize too much. We need to be unapologetic when it comes to producing energy for Africa. That's why my position is very clear. Drill, baby, drill. I'm very, very proud of it. And Trump stole it from me, but now it's more famous. But I said, produce every drop of oil or gas you can find to better the life of our people. When our people are doing well in Africa, we can then discuss on our own timelines how we transition into some other form of energy, renewables, which we still have. We have abundant sun and in Africa that we can make it work for us. But the sun wouldn't shine forever. The wind doesn't blow forever. You might need natural gas to give you that base load to industrialize.
I'm going to have to agree with you that China was not stopped when they decided to industrialize in the late 1970s or the early 1980s. They decided to do it, and they uplifted nearly 1 billion people out of extreme poverty. They gave mass amounts of people jobs and accessibility to infrastructure and sustainability and things like that. And that is why I tend to agree with you that Africa must industrialize first. We cannot assume that Africa must be the least outputting country in terms of global emissions or continent when the global north is putting out 50 or 60 or 70% of total global emissions. We need Africa to industrialize, to build the technology, to be taught how to sustain it and whatever on their own terms, on our own terms. Because when we do it on the terms of the global north, we've seen that the consequences are severe. Environmental damage. People in countries in Central North Africa where Tesla factories have been built, their water supply has been damaged. There's so much sulfuric acid in the water that people are born with disabilities and so forth. So my question would be, if we continue to drive this green energy agenda by the standards and basis of the global north, what consequences will ordinary Africans face in the next 10 or 20 or 30 years?
It would destroy the continent. It would. Believe you me, if we go this green energy thing, a lot of us, our countries are going to be failed states. We're going to see a lot of more crisis and more austerity from governments. You're going to see more uprisings. Isn't it ironic that the more we push green energies, we keep seeing coup d'etats going across Africa, something we thought was the past? Because the green agenda means that it's something that means that we have to be dependent on aid, because they tell you, pack your resources, don't have sovereignty, don't have independence. Mama is sitting out here in the global north. The wealthy nations are going to be a mama. And so guess what? We are going to take care of you. And so what that means that we're going to be like welfare queens, living on subsidies the entire time. And when you do that, then we become nations that continue the same curse of aid. We've seen so much aid money, trillions of dollars spent in this continent. What do we have to show for? Still a lot of mismanaged, a lot of corruption, lack of transparency, but then you still have the same donor nations come back here with their really nice, brilliant people, and they come and they give us lectures about how we're going to live our lives and tell us we need to drink almond milk, we need to eat tofu and don't eat meat and don't drink milk, and this is what you need to do, and you bring you their own things.
Motivational speeches are replaced with industrialization.
Absolutely. So you're telling for us that we shouldn't do for ourselves what we think is good. You would do for us. I think if we continue this path of embracing a radical, extreme transition to green energy and pushing things, we are going to see a lot of crisis in this continent. We're going to see a lot of people sick. We're going to see a continent that doesn't have the food security for itself. And you know what we could do with gas? Like, people just think gas for power. No. You could take, if gas is a feedstock that can be used to build urea, ammonia, NPK fertilizer plants. Look at the vast land you have in Africa. We drive our own fertilizer plants. What do? We power Africa and we industrialize with agriculture. And when we industrialize with agriculture, guess what? We don't beg for food from America. We don't beg for food from Europe. We don't go to Russia and Ukraine to beg for food. We can feed our own people. And when we can feed our own people, we can trade among ourselves. And that's it. So that's just something that gas does for you. How are you going to get fertilizer from solar panels or wind turbines? You need natural gas to guarantee our food security. If we don't have fertilizers, 50% of Africa would be dead because we can't feed people. You can't beg for food all your life. Right now, Trump says, I'm cutting all aid. What if they say, okay, we cut off all food supplies to Africa?
What happens then?
We're left to perish.
Yeah.
Because it just took Trump one signature to say we cut off all aid. So let us be able to have that sovereignty for ourselves, that we use gas to produce fertilizer and we drive up an agricultural industry in Africa. And you know what happens? Our young people work. They feed. Everybody doesn't have to be at the farm. Some people can sell the food products, but then we can still enrich even our cash crops like cocoa and coffee and other stuff. We do it very well. That's the power of natural gas that can transform our continent and make us self-sufficient rather than rely on Europe or the wealthy nations.
Because Western nations tend to build their wealth off the hard work, of the extraction, the colonialism, whether economic or political, of the global south. If we do not get together as independent nations within the African continent and talk about how Africa will forge its own path into the future, create its own wealth sustainability. As you said earlier, if aid worked to Africa, you'd see Africa creating its own wealth sustainability.
Yeah.
Yet we don't see this because all the aid that Africa receives goes back directly to the lending
Of
nations,
course.
much more than they've actually received in subsidies and so forth.
Yes.
So how do you balance that while not cutting off the West or East entirely, but still finding that balance as independent, sovereign African nations?
First of all, there's an American singer, Aretha Franklin, RESPECT, respect. You don't get respect, you earn respect. So we have to do some things that are important. How we have governance within our continent, how we take care of our people, how we manage those resources. Let me tell you something. I fight for local content all the time across Africa, but I always tell these brothers, I say, you don't get $1 million in contracts and the first thing you do is buy an apartment in Portugal or London or Paris and buy yourself a Range Rover and then also some fancy car. No, you invest in business. So we got to behave proper and we got to do the right things. And when we do that, then we earn a lot of respect from even our people who doubt us or our adversaries. But also, what is also important is that how we run our economies. You see, Singapore is a small country, but they get the respect from the wealthiest countries around the world because they built a clean, strong, resilient economy in there. We need to be able to do that in Africa. And that is our job because there's also responsibilities that come with us. So it's not just rights, but also responsibilities. When you do that, then we sit on an equal footing. Because at one point you sit back and say, I don't really need your money. Because the biggest problem we have at the negotiating table today with many African nations is because you sit back and say, well, if you don't do this, if you don't agree to this, we're not going to provide funding for your projects. And by the way,
Political blackmail.
It is worse than that. Economic blackmail. If you don't stop producing coal in South Africa, we will not provide funding for other things. A condition to us providing you some kind of financial, it's a loan that you're still paying for, but so we don't just talk about loan terms, right? We go, yes, the loan terms, you're going to make 10% interest or 5% interest, but one other condition. You got to stop producing gas and oil and coal. And by the way, all the green energy materials that you need, you're going to have to buy it from us. So we sell it to you at a price that is outrageous. So I think we need to be very firm. And that's why, remember I told you before, produce here in Africa. Build a value chain here in Africa. And when you build that value chain here in Africa, money is moving around your continent and you're growing. Then they can come around and lecture you and bring these crazy ideas of telling you to abandon your resources. I think that is the most outrageous thing I've heard in my entire 45 years of life, where someone tells you, abandon your natural resources because we are scared of global warming. And while we are using the same resources, nice try, but we got you.
Yeah. I think you might agree with me. Like we said earlier, we don't disagree with the fact that green energy should become inevitable and part of our daily lives. Do you think the problem is who is implementing it? Like the global North, Europe, America. Do you think green energy being implemented, created on African soil by Africans would take a totally different route than the global North?
Absolutely. We have to do it our own way. We have to do it our own way. Let me give you an example. Germany has spent $800 billion on their Energiewende. It failed. Absolute disaster. $800 billion lost. They're still heavily relying on gas, heavily relying on coal. You see wind turbines next to coal power plants. You have people today in Germany that they are receiving therapy for seeing these windmills blowing around every day. It's really bad what's going on there in Germany. They need to fix that. But now what is happening there is that we need to be, the only way you are going to really have a green transition that works, it has to be homegrown. If it is imposed, it doesn't work. If it is lectures, it doesn't work. But they can sit back there and say, okay, what about they talk to Africans differently and say, what do you need? That basic question, what do you need to have a great transition to work in Africa? Africans have never been asked that question.
We don't need money in Africa.
But that's the point.
Yeah.
They don't ask you what you need. They just come to you and say, we'll give you money. Okay, good. You find a brother, you show up, he's like, we'll give you money. It's like, all right, give me the money then. But the thing there is that you need technology. You need technical education. You need know-how, because you know what? When you do that, when you build capacities, transfer technology, create some support around the value chain, guess what happens? You remember those 70% he said of those young people? You just unleash potential. You just unleash these guys. They go out there, they run small businesses, they are building different things, and that's how they're growing. Look at what Africans did with mobile money. Look at what they've used the community telecoms and the internet and everything to be able to do. They are outpacing their colleagues in the global north because of their access to information. So this generation, the biggest thing we're doing today is that we underestimate what our young people can do. So if you look at them and you say, it is half empty, you make big mistake. You need to look at them and say they half full, and just empower them to go right up. That is the thing. Stop talking to Africans. Talk with Africans, and you have a solution to a successful transition. But they just wouldn't, because part of the green movement is that it is patriarchy. We tell you what to do. You don't know anything. And how dare you have the audacity to say you want to use your resources to better your lives? We know the resource that you need to use. And whenever you're in crisis, we'll come help you because you are second class. And I think people are tired of that.
Yeah, I think people are tired of waiting for permission from the global north. I think for too long, the world has labeled Africa and Africans as either lazy, either intellectually lazy, or just not wanting to create something. But they forget that Africa has been exploited and colonized for 400 years, where entire ideas and cultures and the exchange of information, like the Library of Alexandria, was destroyed.
Yeah.
And for 400 or more years, African people have had to learn, have had to gather information through Western philosophy, through Western systems of thought.
Whatever they tell you, that's
Whatever
it.
they tell you, you have to go through that. Instead of allowing Africans to create their own systems, their own sustainability on their own terms. I think internationalization has become something we view as one patriarchy versus another, when in reality it's really about empathy and working together. If we empower the African continent on their own terms, you solve world hunger, you solve poverty, you solve all the problems of the modern
Somebody
of the modern
wouldn't
era.
profit. Somebody wouldn't profit.
But then somebody would not profit.
And that's exactly the problem. I'll give you an example. I was in Senegal last week. On Thursday, I was speaking at a conference. I was done. I was going to leave. The brother minister told me, please go to Gorée Island. Gorée Island was one of the biggest slave hubs where you have the door of no return in Senegal. So me and a few people from the oil and gas industry went to Gorée Island, and you saw the stories, how people were put in, shipped to Brazil, to the Caribbeans, and to the Americas. You saw stories on where the inhumanity of that. And I think that should be not just a painful moment for us, but also should be a reflection on how we say, never again should this happen. Never again should these atrocities happen. And never again should we be left to have others decide how we are going to forge our future. We can work with others. We should never say we would not work with anybody. I think being an isolationist, it's terrible. But you have to go for a win-win. There has to be mutual respect, and there has to be dignity. Because at the end of the day, the dignity of people, it's really important. And when you show that, what has been lost in this transition discussion is that There's no respect, there's no dignity. It's just Africa. This is it. You do it. Shut up. Go. And you get a guy like me. You don't tell me to shut up. That's hard, And if you don't give me a chair at that table, I bring my own chair. And and that's just the way it has to go.
Africa should stop being diplomatically friendly, because I think that is what a lot of northern countries, the global north, mistakes Africa for.
I think our culture allows us to be nice.
Be nice.
We're too nice. We're too respectful.
I've realized that history has shown that African communities have been very welcoming to foreigners, to European colonists when they arrived in Africa, willing to work together, willing to trade. And somewhere along the line, power and the will to be on top went wrong. And we started implementing dispossession and stealing and colonialism and whatever it might be.
But don't you think we need checks and balances? Because, I'll put it this way. We are so interconnected in the world today, and Europe and Africa, America and Africa, global north, global south. I say we like peanut butter and jelly, But what we also fail to understand is that we have to find ways to build our own authenticity and let others fit in, and not always look to fitting into what they want us to be. Because I think for far too long, we have let the wealthy nations define who we are. And I think if we let them continue to define who we are, we will never be or reach the potential that we can be. Because Dr. King says a man can't ride your back unless your back is bent. Sometimes we need to get our back. We need to get our back up and say, we're seeing where we're going and we're pushing that. And I think, Pieter, just what we've been able to do on energy and really standing up against these green zealots and these, I call them green colonialists, it's very important. We've caught a lot of hell. We've seen a lot of breakback. We've seen the attacks. We've seen the pushbacks. But it doesn't stop you, because you got to be resilient. You got to move. You got to keep going and just keep coming. And the message is resonating. That's the reason why we have a 4 million membership at the African Energy Chamber. And you know who our members are? Mostly young Africans, because they realize that don't come tell us to stop. You're not stopping. You're producing oil and gas. America is the largest producer of oil and gas in the world, bigger than Saudi Arabia. So if you want us to stop, tell America to stop first. Don't focus your efforts on sending your NGOs to come down here and tell us to stop. No, we cannot let that happen. We are going to produce oil whether they like it or not.
Yeah, I think first off, I need to say that this conversation has been very informative, and I think somewhat controversial to some people. But I'd like to ask you, do you think Africa can realistically pursue green energy while simultaneously industrializing and creating jobs within the African continent?
You have to produce both. It's an energy mix, because you have to look at the energy systems, right? Solar and wind, not bad, good, but guess what? It is intermittent. So sometimes it would not be able to produce. So what you do is that you could produce 100 megawatts would be functioning at 30 megawatts. So it becomes very expensive, even though it was cheaper to install. But right now, what you need base load. So what kind of form of energy you need to industrialize? Heavy industry, cement factories, big businesses. You need base load. So you get that from coal, from nuclear, and from natural gas. So here's the problem. If the problem is emissions, we should focus on building technologies to capture the emissions of the air, so we can still develop. But you have to also look at where we're going in the future. It's not just having energy. No, it's not energy transitions. For Africa, it's energy additions, because we need energy. So we're sitting today, we're discussing with young people, and I want to focus a lot of young Africans. This crowd, people don't talk about them because they're broke, they don't have money, but they got power and they're going to get more money in the future. They want to get into the generation of AI. How do you make AI function? Data centers. Data centers, you're not talking megawatts, you're talking gigawatts. So if you're going to produce gigawatts, you're going to have to need a lot more energy. If you're going to give mama on the street some energy to run her small business, you're going to have to produce more energy. But then it cannot just be expensive. It got to be affordable. So we got to look at it with the sense of, do we have our energy that is abundant and affordable and also reliable? Okay, because it has to be abundant, affordable, and reliable.
And
so
created on the terms of Africans.
Absolutely. And that's why you need to have it here, because, you put a solar panel, they control it all day from China or wherever they control it. The day you don't pay, they shut it down. You don't have access to it anymore. So I think we need to be very careful. It's not just that let's just have energy. No, it'll be affordable. We have to be able to pay for it. Got to be reliable. Got to be 24/7. Because you don't want to stop some young man because he's walking and you say your TikTok just stopped or your Instagram just stopped because electricity went off. We saw it with load shedding. So we can do all of that, but you got to find a balanced way. And we need to stop the demonization of this form of energy because, now the green energy movement is coming in. They want to push the agenda so bad. So they got to demonize the other guy and say, oh, that guy is destroying the world and everything. Emissions are a problem. Capture emissions of the air. You don't have a problem. We can do that with technology. I mean, we put a man on the moon. We got COVID vaccines in less than a year. Yeah. You think we can't capture greenhouse gas emissions of the air?
Because capital is behind the
Of course, capital is behind it because you're going to have to change the whole game. And guess what will you do? To your Africa, we give you loans, and unfair loans.
That will destroy you.
And those loans will destroy you. It will make you beholden because now these wealthy nations become your bankers because they finance all your green energy.
With interest.
More than interest. More than interest. And your own resources are left on the ground. They are stranded. You have stranded resources, stranded assets, and stranded lives. I think that needs to change.
I'd like to thank Mr. Ayuk for being here and for taking the time to speak with me. It's been informative, it's been eye-opening, and I would like to speak to you again in the future. I spoke about aid, Western aid, and how it looks charitable but is usually disguised control in my previous episode, and I think that would make a great addition, adding that and connecting that to the green energy agenda.
Absolutely.
If you'd like to say one thing to young Africans out there about the energy agenda, about industrializing Africa, what would your message be to them?
Think energy, sort out careers in energy. Don't let the energy industry shy you, because the energy industry is going to drive the world. It's always driven the world, whether geopolitics, whether energy for the future. But with 600 million people without access to electricity, if you can find solutions for that, you're going to make a lot of money, but you're going to be a solution driver and a hope giver to so much in Africans. And our young generations that wants to win the AI challenge, energy is the pathway to that, to get out data centers. So you must not back away from the energy industry, because if you do, you'll be sorting the same solutions from your friends in the global north or in Asia, and we're going to be behind. You need to lead. It's your time to lead. We failed. Now it's your time to lead and be successful.
As always, this podcast aims to expose power where it hides, unapologetically and unequivocally. So if you came here for polite commentary, I think you've been in the wrong room. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a true honor.